Hello, everyone. How is everyone doing today? Welcome to another episode of the Stop Being Invisible podcast. Hello, Dr. Lane.
Dr. Ingrid, how are you today?
I am doing great. Personally, of course, I can't speak for the Department of Education.
There are
How
a lot
are
of other
you
agencies,
this
yes.
week? This week has been a little slow in the news, I think.
Yeah,
I'm being sarcastic.
for sure, yes. Uh-huh.
Yes. Where do we start? I don't even know. Dr. Lynn and I talk of obviously before this podcast, and we just didn't know where to start. There's just so much to tackle today in just a short amount of time. Um, so I think maybe let's just start with the news that
Nice.
what happened this week. We found out that there's going to be, first of all, a lot of people were laid off, fired from the Department of Education. Like it's happened with every agency, or almost every agency, I should say, in the federal government the past 2, 3 weeks. Um, and like most of these agencies, they have been subjected to some kind of a fund freeze where uh, those who are responsible um, for initiating this freezing of funds um, are saying that this is being done to cut government waste and abuse and fraud. We know, and I just want to say that all sounds fine. I don't think anybody would oppose to the cutting of fraud and abuse and waste. I think those are things that we can all subscribe to. But the way that it's being done is not a way that's being careful, thoughtful, and beneficial, in particular to families and children. And Dr. Lane and I have many years of experience. Dr. Lane, you said we have about 6 years combined.
I would say that.
It's a
50 of them
long
mine, 10
time.
years, yes.
It's a long time.
Yeah. I think the
You
cuts are being done without ramification. I don't think, there's any thought. It's like I saw a drawing or I remember somebody saying they're going in with a sledgehammer rather than like a scaffold or
right.
scalpel to try to,
Couple.
yeah,
Yeah.
try to make the changes. It's just going in and just like boom, boom, boom. And it's like, wait a minute, you're not even thinking of what the ramifications are going to be to the people you're impacting.
Yes.
I mean, the cuts and the services that are going to be eliminated because of these
Yes.
cuts.
Yes. That's the thing. Once you implement cuts, you're not just, first of all, you're firing people that impacts directly those families that of the people that you're firing. But let's forget about that. If you're of the idea that those people they need to be there to begin with, I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I don't agree with that. I think people were already overworked as it was. And now there's going to be even fewer people to fulfill those roles. But also the people who you are impacting directly, those families, those children. And I think for us to even begin to talk about that, and of course we're talking about Department of Education, is specifically because this is what our expertise lies. We've been dealing with the Department of Education. I don't I don't know a time when there wasn't one. Yeah. This is as far as I remember my entire career, there was a Department of Education and things would flow in a particular way. Um, how it's going to be done now, that's the new part. That's what we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure this out, Dr. Lane and I, and we wonder how those who are who are being given this responsibility to make these cuts and fund the freeze these funds are going to again not the scalpel way of cutting things but the axe, right? How are they going to determine how this is going to flow? So I think maybe I don't know if you, Dr. Lane, want to like tell people a little bit about what the Department of Education does. And one thing I just want to like one caveat that I want to, I want to just insert in here before we just, we continue because people might say out there, they may say, but the Department of Education was created by an act of Congress, so it has to be dismantled by an act of Congress. I just want to remind everybody that that bill has been introduced, and that is part of one of those priorities that's been set forth by this administration. It was in the works the first time around in 2017. They never got around to doing that. As a matter of fact, I think they increased the funding. Like they realized not as easy to do. This time, they're not using the scalpel at all. They're using the axe, and it doesn't matter who it impacts. So, with that being said, Dr. Lane, I don't know if you want to pick up here and let people know what the Department of Education actually does.
But I think a lot of people don't understand what it does. It's like, okay, Department of Education doesn't sound like it's that big of a deal in the country, but I
Yeah.
mean, it administers federal funds, and obviously the funds are appropriated by Congress, for schools K through 12. Um, Two of the biggest programs that the Department of Education, administers is the Title I program, okay, which is meant to educate children from lower income families, and the other, it enforces laws like Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the one we talked about last week on our podcast, IDEA.
Yes.
Um, and Section 504, and you know, 504
Yeah.
ensures that students.
504, like that's a like sneaky one because I think people don't realize that a lot of children go to school, regular school in a regular class with no other services, but with a Section 504 plan. So there are a lot of children who have a medical issue.
Mhm.
Let's just say your child has juvenile diabetes, right? And they need to miss time in the classroom at certain points because they need to be administered insulin. I'm just throwing that out as an example. There may be a child who has a severe anxiety disorder who might need to leave the classroom once in a while because they need the service of a counselor. For example, it's a very sneaky one. It's a 504 plan. Your child has a particular medical issue, psychological issue that is not enough to warrant an IEP, an individualized education program, but it's enough to um, for them to have a plan so that if anything happens during the school day, these things could be administered. So it's very important. 504. People might not even realize it exists, but it's also part of special education law, correct, Dr. Lane?
Yes, it is, and it's like you said, it's sometimes very even people don't even know about it. I mean, it's and it comes under the blanket, and I mean, I had a student who just had to go to the nurse every once in a while because the noise in the classroom was just too much. They had
Yeah,
a quiet time in the classroom. They could just go sit over there just until they got themselves back together. And it was just the student would have a total meltdown in class and just kind of upset everybody,
right,
and it was just
right.
like they could just go to the nurse, go to the counselor, just go talk to somebody, just go to some quiet area.
Yeah,
But and people don't realize about the 504. They just think it's all for students who have major disabilities and those kind of
yep.
stuff. It's impact everybody. you
That's
know
a point that actually I'm glad that you brought it up because a point that I kind of wanted to make. Um, and I know the two of us have experienced this during our careers. The idea that because it doesn't impact my child, well, my child doesn't have a 504 or an IEP, doesn't get any service. My child is super smart. So none of this really impacts my family. What do we say to that? We have a lot of things that we can say to that. Um, I don't know. Do you want me to go first?
Go ahead.
I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
think I don't think I think every day I could come up with something new, but first of all, it impacts everybody. When a child has an IP or a child has a 504 plan or the school is receiving Title I funds, that's not just for one child, that's for everybody. You brought up a perfect example. If this child was not given that 504 plan, if that was not in place, if that accommodation was not there, then everybody else would have a problem, right? A child who has a 504, an IP or a 504 plan, their needs are being met in a way that that child does not become a drain, or I hate to use this word, but that child will become a full participant in society. Well, let me use this very popular thing. We're making a new taxpayer, right? We're
Hmm.
making sure that this child, when this child is done with the education, he or she has a great opportunity to become a full participant in society and become a taxpayer. Um,
And to improve their quality of education or quality of life.
yeah, obviously, I'm just trying to make an argument for the people in the back of the room
Right.
who are saying, well, my tax dollars, your tax dollars are at work here. Your tax dollars are at work when we service a child that's not your child. I used to get this a lot when I was a teacher. I was an inclusion teacher. A lot of my children had behavior and emotional issues. And of course, they had IEPs. And of course, they were in a separate, um, you know, uh, location for part of the day. And of course, they had a million accommodations. Um, and people would say, well, I don't care about those children, I care about mine. And I would say to them, I care about them because in caring about these children, I'm caring about yours. I want to make sure that they're emotionally mature to handle stresses and traumas in their lives so that they don't have to go out and steal or rob or kill or any of those things. And when your child encounters this child out on the street, they can be friends and not enemies, or they're encountering them in a very positive way. That's what I want to do with my children. I want to make sure that I provide them with the best education so that not just them, but everyone else benefits from that.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah. So, do you have any other stories that you would like to share with us?
Yeah. Uh, and again, you think about the incidences that are happening in our schools. We had Parkland in Florida. We've had Sandy Hook.
Yes.
There was one recently, I think in India, somewhere in Indiana, just the other day. He was going to do a Valentine's Day massacre. You
Oh
know,
my
and
goodness.
yeah, and I mean, and those were the one he had idolized the one that was done in wherever on Valentine's Day, and he set his up to be almost the same. He was ready to kill a bunch of students. And I mean, he may not have had a 504 plan, but and he just got through the cracks, and how that would have impacted all the other students in the school.
Yes.
He doesn't need special education money. He didn't need anything, but just his behavior
Right.
would have impacted everybody
Yes.
in the school.
Yes.
Had he had, maybe a 504 plan where he could have talked about it with somebody, been excused from class when he got anxious or something. Maybe he was being bullied.
Yeah.
And it was like, if I could have had time to go to the school counselor,
Yeah.
it might not have gotten to where it was.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great example. Fortunately, nothing happened. But this is what it is, guys. I don't know if I have. I like to throw out some numbers so that people are aware. So we've already discussed at Department of Education most of the funding that leaves the Department of Education, the federal Department of Education, goes to the states, right? And
Yes.
it goes under these umbrella, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which we call PL 94-142. Um, It's
and IDEA and
I
504.
yeah,
I mean, just alone, these two programs, okay, provide K through 12 schools about 2 billion with a
yeah,
B billion,
yeah,
$2 billion a year.
yeah,
Okay?
yeah, yeah.
And just
I don't want
10%,
an idea. Yes,
and just
idea.
10% of that 2 billion B comes from federal funding, with the rest, roughly 90%, coming from state and local taxes.
Yeah. And the thing about that with the local, state and local taxes, and this is the one thing that we really need to pay attention, if and when this goes back to the states, that's where I think a lot of people are going to understand the word equity for what it really means. Because if you think that every state is going to handle this the same way, you're mistaken. There are many states in the union. Um, my state, New York State, for example, California. I'm sure your state, Dr. Lane, Delaware. I could say probably Connecticut, Massachusetts. There's a few states that don't rely as much in the federal government for Title One and IDEA funds. They, those are the states that people, for the most part, complain because the high taxes, the high local taxes, and this and that, and we've all heard it before. However, when it comes to this, I want to say we, I mean New York, we do take care of our own local schools, pretty much almost all of it. Like we don't get as many funds, as much in funds, I should say, from the Department of Education as states like Mississippi, for example, or I don't know, Alabama. I'm just throwing that out. I know Mississippi is one of them because I think it's one of the states that gets the most funding from Department of Education. I was looking for a chart that would show me, but it's in general. This is very general terms. Um, the states with the most, the higher taxes, California, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, are the ones where they don't have to rely so much on federal funds to support their special education programs, Title One programs. They still do rely on them, but it's easier to absorb. Um, the process is, I have no idea how that's going to happen because I think that's going to be extremely chaotic if that actually reverts back to the states. I don't know what you think, but the equity is going to be something because I mean, this is going to be when would we turn kind of equity in its head, and like, a lot of the states that fought to get rid of equity, I feel are going to need equity because without equity, the very reason why there's a Department of Education and equity is very important is because let's just take an example, a state like in the middle, like South Dakota, North Mississippi, you really educationally can't compete in terms of funds compared to like in New York or California, for example. This is not equitable. So the Department of Education makes sure that those funds reach those states, so that we level the playing field. Um, do you think I'm coming across clearly, Dr. Lane, to the
I
people
think
of our audience?
I think you explained it very well. I mean, I think that the cuts are not going to go to the states that need them. And for the group of people that we deal with, Dr. Ingrid, 90% of United States students, and 95% of students with disabilities are educated in public schools.
Yes.
So if we cut back on the funds, those are the students that we deal with
Yes.
are going to be the ones who suffer. They're
Yeah.
the ones who are going to be losing their services.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think
Whether
that's not going to affect your child, then think again, because we just told you a couple of situations. Also, let's just talk about just life. Life. We talked about that last time. You see me wearing my glasses today, right? I wasn't wearing them last time. Dr. and I were just talking about a couple of health challenges. Um, Life is like that. Your child can be going to a football game on a bus with his team, and the bus can flip over, and your child can have an injury and have traumatic brain injury. I don't know. I've known
Yes,
people who have children who were impacted by traumatic brain injury, and all of a sudden needed a 504 plan or even an IEP. I had a child in my class a few years ago who had um, a progressive condition in his brain. I think with the myelin sheet, and he became progressively more and more disabled. And by the time he ended up in my class, he was quadriplegic. He had a nurse by his side. He had to be in school with a nurse. Obviously, all provided by these funds, right? For provided by IDEA funds. IDEA funds make sure that these things are in place for your child. But this child, and the nurse would tell me, I go to the home to pick him up, and I see pictures of him with skis, with this ski gear, with his family, having a good time in Colorado. Um, and then, as the disease, progressed, he was able to do less and less and less and less. And there he was. So it's just life. You never know. You never know if these laws are going to impact you. Not that you should do it only because they impact you. Um, which is why we live in a society that like this one, right? We live in this kind of society, um, which we want to call a democratic society because we all take care of each other.
there's other. Yes, very true.
Yeah, and the moment that we stop doing that and we start fending for ourselves, I think that the pillars of our society are going to start to disintegrate little by little. But yes, I was actually looking at some numbers here um, for Title One, and also if you don't think that your child benefits from Title One, I can tell you the 60 in the year 21 to 22, so that school year was, remember, right after COVID. 63% of traditional public schools and 62% of public charter schools were Title One eligible. So if you think your child is not Title One because he goes to charter, think again. And Title One it can do so many things. A breakfast program, right, could be part of Title One. A lunch program could be part of Title One.
After school activities.
After school activities can be Title One. I worked in a school district where a lot of working parents benefited from this. These are working parents that were trying to put food on their table, and they depended on these after-school programs um, to feed their families. We're not really talking about people abusing the system here. We're talking about people who are trying to pay their taxes. Um, but there's a lot of, I know there's like math tutoring, reading tutoring could be part of Title One. There's just so many activities, um, so many different things that go into Title One that it's like hard to just name a few.
Really,
Um,
yes. Mm-hmm.
but chances are, just looking at that percentage, that you are familiar with. If your child didn't go to a Title One school, you're probably familiar with someone that did. So,
And,
just
and I've had a lot of, I've had some parents talk, say to me that, they've had parents say to them, well, I don't want a child who has a special need in my child's classroom. But when I was a teacher, and I'm sure Dr. Ingers is the same thing with you, when I had a paraprofessional with me, they always didn't just help the student with special needs. You know,
100%.
they may be helping, but somebody else asks them a question, they turn around. So
Yeah.
it's putting two educators, two helpers in a
Yeah.
classroom so that we are not doing it alone.
Yeah.
And I think people don't realize that, they're not just there to help one particular student.
Yeah.
They may spend most of their time helping that one particular student, but they do help other students.
100%. I had the same exact experience. Um, so these are the things that idea funds pay for, right? Like having paras in a classroom, and and you can ask other parents who are familiar with this, who have had a para in a classroom, and some of them actually form really good relationships with the parents that are there. And I gotta say that some parents would talk more to the parents that were there than to the actual teacher. I've always had a great relationship with the parents with the parents in my classroom, but the parents too. The parents were, um, such a I don't know, integral part of you know the day to day, and not just for the students that needed them. And I've always worked in highly modified environments, and by that I mean a very small classroom with a lot of help, and some of those had one-to-one paras. And, they knew that even though they were one-to-one paras and they were supposed to be with this one student, they were never with the one student. Just obviously they kept an eye on that student 100% of the time, but they were there to be the extra pair of hands to help that with that student. But they fulfilled a much greater role than just that. Yeah.
Right.
So
And
very important to not just think of your own child. I'm just trying to think at some numbers here. 180,000. If
I
they
I saw
if
that
these
where,
cuts
yeah,
go through,
yeah,
yeah, if these cuts to go through, well, they actually are going through.
right.
Um,
Yeah, I mean that was from the Center of American Progress.
yeah,
There's a possibility that
180,000 talking about parents and teachers, 180,000 teaching positions could be lost. And if you want to know how much it affects your kids, 2.8 million students in low-income
and
communities, roughly 7.5 million students, or 15% of a student population receive special education services. So those are the kids that will be affected. So 7.5 million students in special education programs and 2.8 million students in low-income communities. Did I get that right?
yeah, and
Um, and the program could be transferred to another agency, which will make it significantly less likely. This is from, like I said, from a center, like you said, from a Center for American Progress, making it significantly less likely that students with disabilities will receive the service and support they need and deserve. And I work with a state agency, and we are going to have to start wrapping this up in a few minutes. But I do want to say this. That I do work for a state agency, which is the Department of Health for the state of New York, and is, like I said, a very, you know, lucky state, rich state, and we do have a lot of programs, and the state does administer a lot of programs. But there's a wait list for early intervention services. There is a wait list for that. The state manages this wait list. There aren't enough um, people to go around and provide the services. We can, you know, they've done what they could. There aren't enough people to go around because there aren't enough funds to go around and provide races to people or make it attractive. I know that a lot of people work privately, but 99% of my student population, the parents cannot afford private. So when they don't have the services, they just go without. Uh, this would be a very similar situation, right, Dr. Lane, if
yes, it
this
would.
happens?
And I can't speak for the Department of Education what cuts are going there, but I know in other agencies they're cutting people on the probationary
Yes.
contracts. So the first 2 years. So if you cut out a first or second year teacher, educator, they may switch careers
Yes.
And we all know that the age of the workforce is
Getting
getting
older.
older,
Yeah.
getting near retirement.
Yeah.
And if you cut your bottom trainees and they don't have the more experienced teachers to help them,
Yeah.
the effect that this is going to have. You know,
I mean, needless to say, it's going to be extremely detrimental. I didn't look at it that way, but it's true. If you if it's turnover at the bottom of the pyramid, it's going to be very hard to fill. Especially, one thing that I heard someone say, people sometimes go into teaching because it's a great career. They plan to stay in this career for 20 years. If you tell people it's not a secure career, we can you within the first 1 or 2 years, how many people are going to be inclined to study? Because let's say how it is. You got to go to college. You got to get at least a bachelor's degree to get a provisional certificate in most states, and a master's in most states to stay within. And you're not even being, the compensation is not that great. People will go into other careers. People will go into other careers that will be more financially sound for them to go into. So it's going to be this it's going to be very hard to resolve it. 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, if this is the message that we're sending to people. So very, very difficult and very, very. I don't know. I think I
well,
want to. I think
I mean, I've
I want
seen,
to.
yeah, I've seen job offers for special ed teachers with a signing bonus just to get them in.
Correct. Yes.
And I know you know the saying about becoming an educator. You don't go in it for the income, you go in for the outcome. You
Correct.
want to help people.
Especially
You're not going in to get rich, but
especially
you're
in
going to get it
special
in your heart.
education. Yeah,
Right.
it's a difficult job. I'm not gonna, you know, I'm, we're not here to tell people being a special educator is easy. I'm sure you never told your students that. I
No.
never tell people that. It's a very challenging career, but it has we go there for
The
the rewards. We go there
rewards are
not for the
yes.
monetary rewards. It's for the outcomes, that we go there. So, needless to say, I think these proposed cuts are inexcusable and troubling. So the question is, and this is the question I think, Dr. Lane, for next week, because we are planning to come on next week because the pace in the news, I want to
Yes.
say, we're recording this on Sunday, February 16. I want to say that just because the pace in news is incredible. So I want to be there for when it happens. I know Dr. Lane wants to be there for when it
Yes.
happens. So we say we're going to be next to you. We're going to be next to you. And so the question is, has the damage already been done? And that's the question I feel. For next episode, we're going to dig in a little deeper. We're going to see what happens this week, Dr. Lane. We're going to be paying attention to the news. You guys out there, pay attention to the news and you let us know in the comments if you have any questions for us. Anything that we can answer, we'll answer for you in the upcoming episode of Stop Being Invisible. And I think with that said, we can say,
That they're going to
everybody,
just let me close it on one
sure.
note. We talked last week about writing to your representatives and senators and all that. I wrote to both of mine,
So
and
did I.
my two congressmen or my two senators and my one congressperson, and I got responses back from all of them.
Yes.
So they know that we are not
Yes.
being invisible.
Don't
They
don't be invisible. Don't be invisible. The name of this podcast, Stop Being Invisible. We're not gonna let it happen. We're not gonna let it happen. We're going to actually put in a link to help you guys find your congressperson um and your senators, and you make your voice heard. Make your voice heard. Let them know this is important for you. Okay. We want to dig in a little deeper next time. And any questions, leave them in the comments. And thank you for so much for sticking with us. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.